those of you who are familiar with the history of the Rothschild family will know that it was the Rothschilds who financed many of the earliest settlements in Palestine in the 1920s and 1930s. So I found redemption from being an investment banker, as I said, don't all boo and hiss at once, by becoming, 4 years ago, chief executive of a Christian development charity called Embrace the Middle East. You probably haven't heard of it. We have actually been going for 160 years, so I don't know quite how we've managed to go that long without being heard of. But for many years we were better known as Bible Lands. The reason being that we sought to help some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged people in the lands of the Bible. So that was why we were called that. But anyway, we're now called Embrace the Middle East, and we support projects in Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Lebanon, and Syria, helping people of all faiths, but particularly working through local Christians. Well, why am I here? Well, in a way, picking up the point that Daniel made about civil society acting in solidarity with the Palestinian people, I'm really here to talk about one part of civil society, which is the churches. In particular, how Palestinian Christians, a tiny community, as you know, probably more than 10% at the time of partition, now barely 1%. There are more Palestinian Christians from Ramallah in Dearborn, Michigan than there are in Ramallah. You may not know that. How Palestinian Christians have been involved in the struggle for justice in Israel-Palestine, and how British Christians have responded to that cry. And in particular, some of you may be aware that in December 2009, Palestinian Christians produced this document, A Moment of Truth, a word of faith, hope, and love from the heart of Palestinian suffering. It was a document that was endorsed by all the major heads of churches in Jerusalem. It was produced by a committee of Palestinian Christians, and it addressed the occupation. It described the occupation as a sin against God and against humanity. It addressed the issue of the theology of Christian Zionism, which in many ways has underpinned the Israeli Zionist colonialist project in the Palestinian territories. And it suggested some ways in which Christians might respond to the occupation, and in particular called upon Christians to reflect on whether they should engage in boycott, divestment and sanctions against all product produced by the occupation. Now, what is kairos? Well, kairos is actually a Greek word, and it's found in the Bible. In Mark's Gospel, Jesus says the time, or the kairos, is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God is at hand. Basically, it means the right moment. And the idea is that now is the right moment to stand up and start working for justice in Israel-Palestine. As we heard earlier from Jamal, the colonial project is advancing at great pace. The international negotiations are getting nowhere. Now is the right moment to start a grassroots movement for justice in Israel-Palestine. There was a Kairos South Africa document, famously in 1985, against apartheid. So that was why Kairos Palestine came out in December 2009. As a result of this prophetic call by Palestinian Christians, which was in many ways a rebuttal of the assertion that Palestinian Christians are the happiest Christians in the Middle East. You may have heard that claim from Israel. The Christians enjoy full rights in the state of Israel, and the reason why Palestinian Christians have fallen from more than 10% to 1% is because of Islamic fanaticism and the PLO and so on. Of course, I haven't met a single Palestinian Christian who supports that narrative. The document came out, and there was much discussion, particularly of the call for BDS. There were a number of Christians around the world who responded to it. There was a Kairos US response, led by somebody called Mark Braverman, a liberal Jew. I commend his book, Faith and Embrace to you. It's excellent on the subject. There were similar documents in Holland, in South Africa, and so the beginnings were almost like a Kairos movement on justice in Israel-Palestine that was similar to the Kairos movements in South Africa. We Brits, of course, were always late to the party. We sort of dither and so on. So we finally produced this document, which is the British response to Kairos Palestine. It's called Time for Action, a British Christian response to a moment of truth, the Kairos Palestine document. And I'm a co-author of this. There are some other co-authors here as well. And we launched it at a Christian festival called Greenbelt earlier this summer. And it was launched to a great response, and we're very pleased with that. And the idea is to start a grassroots campaign amongst the churches against the occupation and for a just peace in Israel-Palestine. Now, why is this document important? And I do have some copies. If you're from a church or a faith-based background, it is downloadable from our website, Kairos Britain. But I have hard copies if you'd like to take one away this evening. Why is it important to write this? Well, first of all, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility as Christians. You see, it's partly because of us Christians that we're in this mess in the first place. Who were the first Zionists? They weren't Jews. They were Christians. John Nelson Darby, Cyrus Schofield, Lord Shaftesbury, who was actually a president of the Bible's My Charity back in the 1850s. You've heard that terrible phrase, a land without people for a people without land. That wasn't coined by a Jew, it was coined by a Christian, a Church of Scotland minister in 1844. We have the issue of Christian anti-Semitism, this notion of Christ killers, which has pervaded Christian narratives for many centuries and that created the anti-Semitism that led to the pogroms and maybe created the environment in which the Holocaust could take place. Christian Zionism today. There was a very amusing, well, not amusing, it's terrible in many ways, Pew Forum's opinion poll that came out last week. It said that 40% of American Jews believed that the land was given to the Jews by God. If you look amongst liberal Jews or Reform Jews, it's about 16%. The figure among American Protestants is 2/3. Which raises the question, what do the American Protestants know that the Jews don't? So as Christians, we have to take some responsibility for what's going on there. And we also have to take responsibility as Brits, those of us who are Brits. As I said, it was British Christians who were Zionists before even the Jews were. It was the Balfour Declaration of 1917, and we're approaching the anniversary, the centenary of that, which had this imperialistic, colonialist hubris of actually giving away another nation's land. Why? Because we wanted to protect the Suez Canal from those nasty Germans, Russians and French. And there's the line in the sand. We had Palestine, the French had Syria and Lebanon. The Balfour Declaration, which of course was a total abandonment of promises that we'd made to the Arabs previously. There was the way we mishandled the mandate between 1920 and 1948. There's been our nation's almost unqualified support for the State of Israel since 1948. Expressed through, and I speak my previous role before being an investment banker was also being a diplomat in the Foreign Office. You can also boo and piss about that as well. Because the Foreign Office, despite being populated by Arabists, by and large, has been utterly spineless in its holding of Israel to account. And that was manifested ultimately by our nation's abstention on the issue of Palestinian membership of the UN, when most of our EU partners voted in favour. So the document, the Kairos Britain document, it was drafted by a large cross-section of British Christians. It's expressly stated to be a response to Kairos Palestine. We're not making this up. This is our responding to what our co-religionists are saying in Palestine. It looks at the history and British complicity in the Palestine crisis. It looks at the theology of Christian Zionism and starts from the same premise that the Palestinian Christians did, which says that any theology which justifies occupation and oppression is a duff theology. And you need to revisit that theology. And so we look at that, thank you. It looks at the issues attached to the occupation and the injustice, and it finishes with a call to action. The action listed in here, first of all, there's prayer. As Christians we pray, that's just what we do. But also, we don't want people just to pray, we want them to respond. So we say visit. But when you visit, don't go with the Israeli tourism ministry. Don't go with Israeli tour guides. Don't ignore the Palestinian businesses. Do ethical pilgrimage to the land. go and see. But once you've seen, come back and do something about it. We want Christians to challenge the misuse of the Bible to justify the occupation and continued colonialism and colonisation of the land. And in particular, we encourage Christians, and this was perhaps the most controversial bit of this document, to consider prayerfully and after much reflection whether they should engage in BDS. And of course, this is quite a step for Christians, many of whom have a kind of emotional attachment to Israel, sometimes confusing the modern state created in 1948 with the Israel of the Bible. They are different things. So where do we hope to lead? Well, we hope to create a grassroots campaign amongst Christians in the UK concerned for justice. In the book of Isaiah it says, don't give me your empty feasts, but you've got to loosen the chains of injustice. This is the Kairos moment when we need to loosen the chains of injustice in Israel-Palestine. We're not going to go via the bishops. If we wait for the bishops to sign up, we'll wait forever. So we're going to churches, individual Christians, calling them to work for justice in Israel-Palestine. We're very excited about this campaign. If you're involved in a church or a faith community yourselves, do come and see me afterwards. I'd like to give you a hard copy of the document. Thank you very much.